This is a tutorial on how to create a polygonal wallpaper in Blender. I'll take you through the process of setting up your scene, creating a plane, adding some variation to that surface, using the Sculpt tool and Decimate modifier, setting up your lighting, and finally rendering out an image. In a new scene, let's do a few things before we get started. First, let's change the render engine over to Cycles. You can do that by clicking on the top where it says Blender Render and go down to Cycles Render. Next, delete the default cube by hitting X and D on the keyboard, XD. Next, drag up on the border between the bottom panel and switch it over to a 3D viewport by hitting Shift F5 on the keyboard. Next, hit 0 on your numpad to switch it over to the camera view. In the top viewport, grab that camera with right click and hit Alt G and Alt R to reset the position and rotation. Next, let's move it up 10 units. GZ 10 and click. Now we're ready to start working on our scene. Next, we need a surface to work with. Let's add a plane into our scene. You can do this by clicking on the Create tab and then Plane, or in the 3D viewport you can type Shift A, M, P. Next, we need to scale it up to match the edges of our camera view. Tap the S key and drag out until it reaches the outer edge. Enter component mode by hitting the Tab key and then hit WS to subdivide and drag the number of cuts over to 10. You can exit component mode by hitting the Tab key again. Now let's add a little deformation to our surface. On the bottom where it says Object Mode, click on that and switch it over to Sculpt Mode. Now that we're in Sculpt Mode, if we try to paint, we'll see that there's symmetry turned on. So let's turn that off. Undo and scroll down, click on Symmetry and turn off the X Symmetry. Now with the left mouse, click and drag around on the surface to create a deformation. And it's updated in the bottom viewport. But now that I look at that, I think I'd like a little more definition. So press the Tab key to enter component mode, WS to subdivide one more time, and exit using the Tab key. Now let's work on our lighting. First, exit Sculpt Mode and enter Object Mode and grab our point light and lower it down to the surface, right near the surface. And in the bottom viewport we can position it in the top right corner. Now let's go into the light properties and click on Use Nodes. Let's set the strength to 800 and color to a nice blue. And then we can duplicate that light and position it in the bottom left corner. So Shift D to duplicate and Shift Z to constrain it to the X and Y axis. And position it right in the bottom corner of our camera view. Now let's set the color to something other than blue. Let's go the opposite direction and choose a nice orange color. Now let's see how that looks. In the bottom viewport you can press Shift Z to get a rendered view. I think I'd like to move that off a little more. Y and X. There we go. Beautiful. But there's a couple more things we can do to our scene. Click on the world properties and let's change the color of the background to something in the middle. So let's choose sort of a pinky purple. And that adds just a little more colored light to our scene. Next, let's add a decimate modifier to really triangulate this surface. Select the surface using right click and head over to the modifier tab. Click on add modifier, decimate. Nothing happens. Well, that's because our ratio is set to 1. Drag this to the left until you reach something that you find pleasing. These lights are looking a little hot, so I'm going to raise them off the surface a little bit. So right click and shift right click and drag it up just a bit. There we go. Much better. So the last thing we need to do is to render it out. So go into your render settings tab, and this says 50% at the moment, so let's drag it up to 100%. 100% means that you're going to render out at 1920 by 1080. In this case, I'd like to render out as 4K, so I'm going to set that to 200% to double it. And hit F12 to render. Now with our image rendered, let's save it out. You can click on Image, Save as Image, or you can press F3. Give it a name, save image, and we're finished.